You're listening to Aimee Keeps It Creepy, the podcast where I share my obsession with true crime and the paranormal with you. I'm your host, Aimee Brooks. The ghost in the top hat is watching. Don't mind the spirits lingering in the mental ward, ready to haunt your nightmares. But please, pack an extra flashlight. This place gets dark. Very dark. This is Beechworth Insane Asylum, home to Australia's most criminally insane ghosts. Check out my YouTube channel, which I just started. I have 30 episodes in the can ready to launch every week, including the first episode of my Pajama Time Ghost Hunt, which I'm posting more episodes to my Patreon page. That's the ghost hunt of my own haunted house. There's also videos of my paranormal adventures and my episodes from my paranormal road trip across America. I'm also going to be posting a video version of the podcast on my YouTube channel because I know a lot of people like to get their podcast content from YouTube. And fans have been asking me for it anyway, so I really want to give you the content you're looking for. Check out the show notes for my links or just go to creepypodcast.com. And please subscribe to Aimee Keeps It Creepy on Apple Podcast or wherever you podcast so you never miss an episode. And also, subscribe to my new YouTube channel for more creepy fun. I'm happy to welcome to the show Geoff Brown. He's an author, managing director of Asylum Ghost Tours, and part owner of one of Australia's most haunted locations, Beechworth Lunatic Asylum. Hi, Geoff.
Hi, Aimee. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for being here. So I'm absolutely amazed that Beechworth Lunatic Asylum is privately owned. How on earth did you come to own a closed down lunatic asylum? That is so cool.
It is very cool, and I don't know anyone else who actually does that. We used to run creative retreats for horror writers at the facility. We'd hire through the overall owners, and they rang me one day and said, hey, buy some of the asylum and run the ghost tours. And we took a couple of days to think about it and thought, we absolutely have to do this. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. So we did.
Yeah, you don't get those calls very often.
Yeah, no, not that sort of call.
Beechworth is a massive complex of very creepy looking buildings. I'll post the photos on creepypodcast.com so you all can see for yourself. It's 100+ acres. It's massive. And there's nothing like an abandoned asylum to make you scared. What was your first paranormal experience there, Geoff?
Very early on, I had to go over and check a door that wasn't locking after the tour had gone through. So I walked over, took myself upstairs into the old women's ward, which is the oldest section still untouched and unworked. I went upstairs, I went through to the door, and the door behind me slammed and locked.
Ah! No!
And at that point, that lock had never worked, so I wasn't expecting that to happen. And 10 seconds later, my torch stopped working as well. So I was stuck there in the dark on the second floor of a haunted lunatic asylum. What on earth could possibly go wrong from that point?
In the pitch dark, alone. Oh!
I'm just glad I had a cigarette lighter with me. That gave me some light source.
And that is officially the best reason to not stop smoking. Having a lighter handy when you're locked in a room by a ghost. That's the...
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad I had that with me, or I would have been there, complete darkness, unable to find my way out. I didn't even know the buildings that well at that point.
So how did you get out?
I managed to walk through with the cigarette lighter, absolutely crapping my pants all the way through the second floor, down the stairs to the very far end of the first floor, and there was a window I could open from inside, and I climbed out that window, and when I got outside, I breathed the biggest sigh of relief I had ever breathed in my life.
You know, those are those kiss the ground moments. Oh, my goodness. That's crazy.
Very much so. It was, yes.
Oh, so you knew you were in for a ride giving these tours after that. Oh, my goodness.
Very much, yes. But not that long after that, I had to go over and again lock the door after a tour had been through. We didn't have a master keying system initially, so we had padlocks I was walking over and I saw a gentleman standing underneath a tree in the courtyard, and I looked and then did a double take, and he was tall, dressed all in a black suit, black waistcoat, brass buttons reflecting the moonlight, and a top hat. I could see him as clear as day, except for his face, which was all darkness. A split second later, he was gone. I thought, my imagination. I'm overthinking this. I'm expecting to see things. So I saw something. Okay. About half an hour later, I had to go and lock another door and lock the door, turned to walk back to the foyer, and there was the same gentleman standing about 20 feet from me at a corner. Same waistcoat, same brass buttons, all shining in the moonlight. Again, the face I couldn't see. He nodded his head, turned and walked out of sight around the corner. After I could breathe again, I ran to the corner, looked down the walkway. There was nobody there. I thought, okay, 2 times in one night, that is definitely something going on. Okay, I'm alive. I'll go back to the foyer where it's safe and light and everything. And when the tour did come back and all the guests had left, the guide went out the front to have a cigarette, and I heard her scream, and I ran out. I looked where she was looking, and the 3rd time that night I saw the same gentleman walking down a walkway. He passed behind a tree and never came out the other side. I turned to the guide and I asked her, "What did you just see?" And she described exactly what I had seen 3 times in the same night, the same person.
What kind of person would have worn an outfit like that?
Would have been a very high-ranking administrative staff member, or potentially, most likely, the superintendent. The head of the entire hospital would have been dressed like that.
It's so interesting because the nod, it was like he was giving you an okay, like you're doing all right there. Oh,
yes, exactly. That seemed to be it. That seemed to be that was the impression I took from that whole experience as well. He was giving us his okay as to what we were doing.
Because, it could have gone the opposite way, Geoff.
It could very much have.
He could have shook his head no.
I don't know what I would have done then. Somebody like that just looking at me and shaking his head, I would have thought, oh, God, what have I done?
Oh, man. And so the tour guide who screamed, did she come back to work the next day?
Oh, absolutely. Laura's still with us. She's our longest-serving guide. The day after we announced we had bought the asylum, she actually contacted us by private message and said, "I want to work for you." She had worked for the previous company and left at some stage, and she wanted to come back and work to the facility. So we took her on, and she's been one of our top guides ever since.
Wow, I bet she has some stories.
She does, most definitely.
Yeah.
And when she first started back with the old tour company, she didn't believe in the paranormal. It did not take her long for her to change her mind, and now she's 100% a believer.
Well, after you see a full body apparition, it's kind of hard to doubt yourself.
Yes.
And then you saw the same thing she saw, which confirms, because you never said, "I saw a guy in a suit with a top hat." You let her answer. You didn't feed her.
No, I did not explain that to her. I asked her what she saw so that she wouldn't just replicate what I had seen. And she then described to me exactly what I had seen. So I knew then that it was more than just imagination.
Absolutely. So at its peak, the facility was home to over 1,200 patients and employed 600 to 700 people in their staff. It was a huge place.
That's correct. It was definitely a huge place.
And, I hear you only needed 2 signatures to be committed while you needed 8 to be released.
Yes.
Now, I had plenty of men in my life tell me that I was crazy. And it's a terrifying thought that if a husband wanted to get rid of his wife, all he had to do was get a doctor to agree that she was unstable.
Absolutely. And if you had a friend who was a doctor, then it would have been so much easier. I'm sure there would have been a number of less than reputable gentlemen who had a number of wives who were committed so that they could then move on to their next conquest, which is quite sad.
It is. And it's hard for us to understand with what we know about treating people suffering from mental illness. But back in the heyday, Beechworth patients were most likely subjected to the typical medical treatments, straitjackets, restraint chairs, isolation cages, not to mention lobotomies and electroshock treatments.
Absolutely. And electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, is still used successfully to this day in some cases.
No thanks. No thanks. I'd rather pop a pill. No thanks.
Absolutely. But I've spoken to people we get some people who come up and want to talk to us about the history because they are suffering from mental health issues today. And we've spoken to people who found lithium to be very beneficial to their ongoing mental health, people who have had ECT performed, and it's a much less invasive therapy these days. It's very focused. So it doesn't shock the entire brain, just very small sections. And they found that ECT every 3 to 6 months actually helps them keep their depression or anxiety at bay. So mental health treatment is not a one pill fits all. It's very various in its scope and ability to help people.
So tell me about the other areas of the buildings and the activity that you've seen or heard about.
The entire facility is a hotbed of paranormal activity. It varies from night to night. The bull pit, I've had a wonderful experience upstairs in the bull pit, in an area called the clap room, because of what I experienced there. I was in a little room by myself where the previous night of paranormal investigation that was being held, heard noises. And I went in and said, come on, give me a noise, guys. Show me your hair. And next second, somebody clapped their hands right next to my ear. So I pretty much broke a land speed record running out of that room to where everyone else was. So I call that the clap room at this point.
I love it, Geoff. I love that you still get scared. You know, you're a professional, but I love that it still gets you. It makes it real.
Absolutely.
Because I would be terrified. I could never get used to it. Never.
It's worse wandering around there by yourself. And we do that at times. I go out and do live feeds, which we have on our Facebook page, and take a couple of pieces of Paranormal Kit out and venture to the various areas by myself at night. And they're not safe for work or safe for children in any way, because I swear a lot when I get scared, and they're very sweary. So, yeah, I mean, the fear is always there.
I bet you have backup flashlights and a backup lighter, 2 cell phones. You're in there by yourself, deep in the asylum. Oh,
absolutely. And always my best runners on. So it's an honour to have sight of this facility and its history. But at the same time, it's very fear-inducing, even though I know there's nobody out there that actually wants to harm us. We've conducted so many investigations and spoken to so many of the people that still live there, for lack of a better word, because they do. It's their home, and we're their caretakers.
So you never feel a negative presence? I mean, some of them were criminally insane. And if they're still there, I personally think that if you're a bad guy in this life, you're going to be a bad ghost. You know, you're going to cause trouble.
Yeah, yes and no. The most negative experience that we have, the most negative place we have, is actually the laundry area, the old laundry at the end of the women's ward. There were 2 entities there, one named Paul and one named Mary. Now, there's a sad history of those two, in that Mary we're not sure if she was a patient or a staff member, but we know Paul was a delivery driver. And when he made deliveries, he used to assault Mary. And in the end, during one of the assaults, he killed her. He was found guilty, and he was actually committed as a patient. And Paul and Mary are still both there, and Paul is quite a negative character. And, yeah, we have issues with him at times. But, I mean, people who suffer from mental health, it's not their fault the way they are. It's a chemical imbalance within their brain or something that causes them to act the way they do. So I feel sorry for them in that regard. But
it's so ironic that he ends up there to serve his time.
Absolutely. And he's stayed there ever since. I think he's probably too scared to move on because of where he feels he might be going due to his actions in his life.
Oh, okay. Tell me about the cellar.
The cellar, yes. It was used for storage for most of its time, but during the very early years, the prisoners, the hard labour prisoners from the local jail, were kept there at night. So they actually helped build the bricks and carve all the beams and everything, did all the manual labour for the craftsmen, so the asylum could be assembled. And at night, they were kept down in the cellar in the 2 barred wings, and the guards would stay in the centre part and play cards and drink, or whatever guards do overnight. And it saved time for walking them back to the jail and walking them back the next morning, so they could get an extra hour's work out of them, which was, I guess, logical in those days for the hard labour prisoners. And the things that would have happened in those wings, I'm scared to even think about. A heap of prisoners locked in with no real oversight in the wings with them. We've had some scratches that have been done mostly on late teenagers, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Some have been quite severe and some have been mild. And the first time it ever happened was also the most severe case, where there was a full family, about 8 of them, ranging from young girls and boys up to the late teens and the parents. They got down in the cellar and the guide was talking, and in this particular room, he encourages people to turn all the lamps off and tells a story in the dark. Luke, the oldest boy, was leaning back into a corner, and suddenly he jumped forward and arched his back and yelled, "Oh, that hurts, that hurts." So they got him upstairs and they had a look, and he had 2 series of 3 scratches down each side of his spine, from his shoulder blade all the way down. Now, of course, we were curious as to why this had happened and who had done this, so we ran a number of experiments down in the cellar, and the story came out that there was a younger prisoner there who was deaf and dumb, and he used to grab at people to try and get their attention. And I'm sure that if he's still there and he's trying to grab at people to again get their attention and getting frustrated and grabbing harder and harder, the very last grab might actually physically scratch those people.
But why the male teenagers? That's interesting.
I'd say people around his own age, people he feels he can relate to.
Oh, right.
People he can identify with. And it's just pure frustration. We don't think it's anything vindictive. It's just frustration of not being able to communicate. It would have been hard enough when he was alive, when people could actually see him and realise he wanted something. Now, he's got nothing. He's got no means to communicate.
Now he's just a ghost stuck there.
Yes, and he can't even talk to the other ghost.
Oh, that's a sad, sad story.
It is, and the facility's full of sad stories.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. How many people died there, Geoff?
There's records of over 9,000 deaths, and I'm sure there would have been more that went unrecorded.
And were they buried on the grounds?
No, there were none buried on the grounds. Approximately 1/3 were buried in the local cemetery in mass graves, and that cemetery has since been moved. And the Cemetery Trust is at this point trying to go through all the records and give names to all the people who were buried unnamed without headstones. And the other 2/3 of the patients were shipped home to family plots or to plots in their hometown so that their family could visit and honour them.
Wow.
Although with that said, when one of the buildings was moved about 2 years ago, the people who owned the building came up to us a few days later and said, "Oh, look what we found underneath the building." And it actually looks like the upper thigh of a human.
Oh.
So we've still got that bone.
Oh, it would not surprise me that people are buried on the grounds there. Not at all, especially with all the activity.
It wouldn't surprise me, but there are no records showing that. And we're sure that there would have been a few, "Oh, God, we've got to bury this person because we're going to cop hell since they died. We'll just get rid of the body and pretend it never happened."
Totally. And these people are forgotten about.
Yes.
They're left there to rot there. And, just like you said, they were put into a cemetery without gravestones. I mean, a lot was going on there. This month, our Patreon fan bonus episode is a very creepy Thanksgiving murder special featuring some of the most depraved murders committed on Turkey Day. Hey, the holidays sometimes bring out the evil in some people. It can be a stressful time, and these creepy bastards chose a side of homicide with their Thanksgiving turkey. Please pass the pumpkin pie, and don't miss this episode, available exclusively for my Patreon fans. You can find the Patreon link in my show notes or on creepypodcast.com.
It's sad. It's always been a sad thing, the mental health facilities and treatments, although through no fault of their own. I mean, we only work with the science we have, the understanding we have. The book that we published, A Very Short History of the Asylum, is actually called Palace of Broken Dreams, which we thought was an apt title.
Well, so tell me about some of the myths and legends behind Beechworth.
Oh, there are plenty. There are legends about some of the patients. It was thought for a long while that Ned Kelly's uncle, you've heard of Ned Kelly, the famous bushranger with the full metal helmet and breastplate?
Oh, yeah.
In Australia? Yeah, we're in the midst of Ned Kelly country. Ned was known in Beechworth. He had a massive fist fight at Silver Creek here in Beechworth, 20 rounds, nearly 3 hours. He served time in Beechworth Jail, and his mother served time in Beechworth Jail as well. We have a patient record that shows the name of James Kelly. And we thought for a long time, as the previous tour company did, that it was his uncle James, his father's brother. But through some quite deep research we did recently with a professional historian, we found out that he's not the same James Kelly. He's most likely still in the family, but most likely a cousin or something like that. But he had been in mental health facilities for most of his life, which didn't match with the timetable in life known about his Uncle James. So we managed to throw that legend out the window, which is good, because we always try and tell the truth about the facility, not sensationalise it or anything like that. That's dishonourable to the history of the place and to the people.
Sure, but there are stories like the lady who was pushed out of the second floor window. Tell me about that.
Yes, the lady who was in the front of the asylum. It's just to the left of the admin building when you're facing the front. So it's a second-story window, and the legend states that she was a Jewish lady who was pushed out in an argument over some cigarettes. She wouldn't give another patient some of her cigarettes, and the other patient got angry and pushed her out the window, and she fell and died. And because of the Jewish rites that need to be followed in the case of a death, the body actually had to stay there until a rabbi could be brought in to properly prepare the body for removal. And to this day, we still get many people saying that they can see the shape of a lady in that same window. And there are even a couple of photos that I've seen online that are suggestive of a female form in that same window.
Oh, wow. Cigarettes. Oh, man, that's the commodity there.
It's a commodity in all institutions, isn't it? Cigarettes.
Yeah. According to one spooky legend I read about, there's a gardener named Arthur on the property. Do you know anything about him?
Yeah, Arthur is most commonly seen in the women's courtyard, which is the courtyard on the women's side of the building between the main hall and the women's ward. And he's been seen a number of times over the years dressed in what appeared to be period costume. And one day my wife was driving up to go to the asylum and work, and she saw a gentleman standing there in dark green pants and a white calico type shirt. And she looked and, oh, okay, that's a bit strange, and drove in and parked and looked again, and where she had seen him, there was nobody. Now, it wasn't a flaky image. It wasn't a subtle image. It was exactly as though a living person was standing there looking at her. And the more she thought about it, the more she realised the clothing he was wearing was very old-time-ish. So she got out and had a good look through the courtyard. There was nobody there. So she's sure that she saw Arthur.
Amazing.
And that was in the daytime.
That was in the daytime. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So he's still doing the gardening?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, man, I don't want to be gardening in my afterlife or doing laundry. Oh, no way. Well, another
well-known occupant, although we've never actually seen him as a spirit, there was a landscape gardener who came out from England and ended up being committed to Melbourne Asylum in Kew, which was one of the three main asylums. It was Kew, there was Ararat, and there was us. And he was such a renowned landscape gardener, they got him to do all the landscaping for Kew. Then they moved him to Ararat, and he did the landscaping there. And finally, he was moved up to Beechworth and did the landscaping there. So, I mean, sometimes you're most comfortable doing the thing you love. And he loved landscaping gardens. So I'm sure that was good for his mental health.
Yeah, and they got him transferred there to make the gardens look good. That's great.
Exactly, and they still look amazing.
Yeah, you need a good cook. You need a good gardener.
Exactly. So he was doing what he loved. So, I mean, it could be worse, definitely. It was a working asylum. All the patients that could work did work, whether it was on the farm, in the laundry, in the sewing room, making wooden toys for sale, generally being porters and things like that. One of our well-known residents, Tommy, from the foyer where we run our ghost tours from, the main starting area where people check in, he's a resident there. It was originally the kitchen, and he died maybe back in the 1930s or 40s. Rumour has it that he slipped and went to grab something to stop himself falling, and it was a big vat of boiling liquid. He pulled over onto himself, and he passed from that. And he still hangs around, and he's actually made himself known a number of times. He's a little bit of a prankster, I think. He was a red-headed Irish gentleman with a good sense of humour, and he likes poking the women in the ribs and making them jump and things like that. So he's one of the good ones.
Yeah, that's real funny, Geoff. Real funny.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when it's not me.
Oh. Is there still a chapel on the grounds? Because I heard a rumor that there's a haunted chapel that used to be a morgue and people actually get married there.
That is true. The first morgue was...
Oh, who is getting married there in the morgue? Ah!
You'd be amazed the number, and a lot of them don't realise what it was. They took the original morgue, they moved it in the late 60s, early 70s and built a new one because it needed to be modernised. And the old morgue was left unused for a little while, and then it was turned into a chapel. A couple of extra wings added on, and it still exists to this day. It's the only morgue that we have left. The more modern one was torn down, and this one is now called the Chapel of the Resurrection, which is sort of apt considering its past.
Yeah, someone had a sense of humor in naming that, for sure.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely.
Now, is there any truth to this story about a man disappeared and staff looked for him desperately and then a dog named Max found him?
Yes, and we've actually found records and newspaper reports of that. From what we understand, we've spoken to staff members, it didn't happen in the distant past. It was the more recent past. It was probably 40s, 50s. And there were still some of the staff members left. And we've actually spoken to some who were there during this. It seems this patient had a thing for one of the nurses. So he took it upon himself to climb high up into a tree out the front of the nurses' hostel so he could have a bit of a watch of this woman through her window. And it seems he passed away up in the tree. We're not sure whether it was a heart attack or what, because there was not enough left for an autopsy afterwards. He was found to be missing, and there was searching going on everywhere. They looked everywhere, could not find him. And then one day, the dog turned up at the gatehouse carrying a human leg.
No!
They took this leg up to the superintendent's office and said, "Superintendent, we found this human leg." And the superintendent said, "Don't be ridiculous. There's no body parts lying around my asylum." So they slammed the leg on the desk and said, "Well, what do you call that?"
Oh, who did that? That's so gross. They need some hand sanitizer. That's just nasty.
They went looking again, and this time they looked up and they found him in the tree. It seemed his body had sat there for so long it had rotted enough that one of his legs fell off.
Oh.
And Max found it and thought it was a wonderful chew toy.
Oh, what a gross dog. Yuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, dogs are going to dog, aren't they?
Oh, I'd like to think that my little Pomeranian wouldn't eat my leg, but God, you never know, right?
No, you never know.
A lot of patients seem to come through. Do you ever see nurses or members of staff? Do they come through to you on your tours?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The matron is a well-known apparition and connection there. We believe it was Matron Sharp, who was the third matron of the facility back in the 1890s. And she cared deeply for the patient. She was a very calming influence. She brought in pet therapy and art therapy and music therapy in the late 19th century, which was very forward-thinking. She cared for the patients enough that she demanded they had underwear, which they didn't have up until that point. And she brought in curtains for their rooms. And she still wanders the halls to this day and acts as a calming influence. Whenever on our paranormal investigations somebody is feeling particularly threatened, our guides can always call for the matron to come in and comfort. And it seems to bring a comforting presence to the area.
Wow. So you've named her. How do you come up with a name like that?
Through investigation equipment and lots of work, and the records matching what we're told through the investigations. So we would say, what is your name? And the name Elizabeth Sharp came through.
Wow.
And lo and behold, Elizabeth Sharp was the third matron.
Wow. So do you get a lot of EVPs there?
We have had some exceptional EVPs, Class A and Class B. They're not as common as the much harder work of getting them through the equipment that flashes once for yes and twice for no, whether it be the periscopes or the EMF meters. and just working through slowly but surely through the process of elimination. It took a while for our residents to work out how to use the equipment that we use to interact with us, to communicate with us. But once they got it, they have no trouble communicating, and sometimes they won't shut up. It's really cool.
Wow. Tell me about some experiences. I know you mentioned the guys that have had their back scratched. What are the other experiences that some of the people on your tours have had?
Wow, there's been people that have had their hair pulled. There's been people that have had their hats knocked off their heads at times. We've seen stones be thrown a couple of times. We had a photographer in one day who was doing a news story, and he got my wife and I to pose in one of our display areas at a table. And he was kneeling with his camera, and all of a sudden a stone flew over his head and skidded along the floor in between us. It was quite a decent size, probably a marble-sized stone.
But were they aiming at you? Were they aiming at you, Geoff?
No, definitely not. No. It just came over his head and skidded along the hallway. It wasn't thrown to hit anybody, it seemed, just to get our attention.
Okay.
And we all looked at each other, and we went and looked through the area where the stone had come from, and we knew there was nobody there because we had the only keys, but we wanted to assuage his doubts. And we looked through, and he looked at us and said, "Yep, there's no one here, is there?" And I said, "No. Well, there is, but no one you can see. You're never alone up at Beechworth Asylum."
Are there any other stories that you want to share today?
There's the long-rumoured story of a young girl who worked as a servant for one of the administrators, because the administrators lived on the top floor of the admin building, the superintendent. That was his family and his apartment area. And he would have patients who were well-behaved and suited working as servants for the family, as they did back in the day. And there was a rumour of a young girl, probably 9 or 10, who had somehow displeased the superintendent, maybe dropped a cup of tea or slipped and spilled a tray or something, and he had her locked in a small closet-like space as punishment. And the next day, him and his family went down to Melbourne for some conference or a holiday and forgot that he had left the young girl in that room. And the rumour suggests, and we've had, again, confirmation through the equipment, that she died of starvation there. And every time we place equipment around that area in front of there and open that room, it's almost like there's a young child skipping from one piece of equipment to the next, running around it and then skipping back. It's very childlike in the way it responds, which is really cool.
That's unbelievable.
And it especially responds well to one of our guides who was a school teacher and really gets along well with children, and he manages to somehow draw all the children of the facility or the younger minds of the facility to him, and they play what he calls pig in a barrel up and down corridors with all the equipment and everything, and the guests just love it.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it takes a long time to starve to death.
Yes.
What a jerk. How do you lock someone in a closet and forget about it? He knew. What an evil person. Oh.
Yeah, or at the very least, careless.
Yeah.
Criminally careless.
Oh, so interesting. I've never been to Beechworth, and I can't wait to go. It sounds like a fascinating place.
We'll give you a private tour, Aimee, if you decide to come over.
Oh, yeah. We'll do a part 2 of the podcast.
For sure.
Oh, I want to see the guy in the top hat. That's the one I want to see.
The visual appearances are the hardest for them. It takes the most energy. They're few and far between. We do get a regular sighting of a shadow person at the end of a corridor in Grevillea, the medical ward, and some photos have been taken of that, which are quite convincing and eerie.
Oh, I'll post those on the website for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah, I actually had a sneak peek, and they're really, really creepy. It's so humanoid. It would be hard to fake that. It's very convincing. Yeah,
absolutely. And we don't do fakery. We never have. I debunk everything. If it could possibly be a possum or a bat or something, that's what I put it down to. But some things are unexplainable.
Or explainable. People just don't like the explanation.
Exactly.
Do you have a creepy true crime or paranormal story that you would like to share on Aimee Keeps It Creepy? I know you do. Please email a brief description of your story to info@creepypodcast.com. I can't wait to get creeped out. Thank you for listening.
Toxic content. Toxic content.